Hello there! In this video we'll continue learning all the extensions in Inkscape. This is part 3, where we'll take a look at all the extensions in the Raster and Render menu. This time we are looking at only 2 menus, because they are quite big and have a ton of extensions we have to go through. But before starting, I make tutorials on Inkscape every week, so if you're interested make sure to subscribe for more. Also, every like and comment are highly appreciated and helps the channel a lot. Okay, let's continue with the extensions. The Raster menu has some of the most useful and interesting extensions in my opinion. Everything here deals exclusively with bitmap images that you import. They will not work with paths. It tries to add some degree of image processing functionality to the program. Obviously, it will never be at the level of an actual raster software like Photoshop or GIMP, but if you need to do some quick adjustment to an image, this menu has you covered. Adaptive Threshold performs a special type of threshold. In image processing, thresholds are a way to get a black and white only image out of a picture. Very important, this does not mean grayscale. The resulting image will be made of only 2 colors, black and white. Anyway, adaptive threshold is a technique to achieve that. It is made particularly for this type of images where you have this unequal lighting, like badly scanned books where traditional thresholds may not work as well. The only controls are the width, height, and offset. I'm not a graphics programmer. I got no idea what each input does. I just mess around with the values until I get what I want, and I recommend you to do the same. Add noise will add different types of noise. In the option there is only a drop-down and no intensity controller. You should go one by one and try the different algorithms, and see if one of them works for you. It's such a shame the lack of an intensity controller. To me that makes the extension almost useless. Blur adds a simple blur. Many of these raster extensions seem to have 2 generic controllers, radius and sigma, and usually they tend to do almost the same thing. In this case they control the intensity of the blur. Channel displays only the selected channel of an image. A channel is a black and white representation of one of the colors present in the image. With this extension you can see most channels, though the cyan, magenta, yellow and black do not seem to work for me. Also, the opacity channel will display the opacity of images that can display opacity, like PNGs. Charcoal creates this relief look that to me it doesn't look at all like charcoal made, but that can be useful to get a nice effect in your work. Once again you have this generic radius and sigma input. Radius will control the intensity of the effect, and sigma how dark or light it is. Use sigma between 0 and 1. Colorize will let you add a color tint. You can select the colors with any of these selection modes. This extension seems to work better with black and white images where the local hue is less of an influence. Contrast enhances the contrast. There is a single input that lets you control the intensity of the change in contrast. Crop will let you crop the image based on 4 inputs. It is fairly simple to use but really awkward, because you don't have a visual or interactive way to see the cropping. It is a bit of trial and error. Cycle color maps changes the color map, whatever that is. I tried experimenting with the extension and searching online for the definition, and I'm still not sure what it is or what it does exactly. The extension does swap the colors of the image, so I'm guessing it has something to do with that. The amount input goes from 0 to 360, but I can't identify exactly what it is doing other than swapping some colors. I don't see a specific use I could give to this extension, but again I'm not a graphics programmer. Despeckle will remove the speckles and grain out of the images without destroying too much the edges. It has no options and it works great. Dither adds dither to the image, which is a type of noise apparently used to avoid other visual artifacts, like color banding, though because there is no way to apply any of these effects to a particular area of an image, it can damage areas where you don't want it. The only option is amount, which controls the strength of the effect. Edge will try to detect the edges and make this black and white result. You control the intensity with radius. Depending on the image, different radius numbers will work better, though usually you'll want to keep it to the lowest possible. Emboss adds this border at the edges to simulate an image being embossed in a surface. You have the two generic options, radius and sigma, though only sigma seems to do anything. I've had the best results, keeping it between 0.1 and 2. Though like with most of these effects, you should try it for yourself and see what works best for your particular image. Enhance seems to only minimize noise a bit, like Despeckle but weaker. Equalize will equalize the color frequencies. I'm not entirely sure how it works internally, but you can use it to get this really nice Instagram filter look for your images. It has no options. Gaussian Blur will add Gaussian Blur, which is a different type of blur than the previous one we saw. It has those generic options, factor and sigma, and you control its intensity with both of them. HSB Adjust lets you replace the colors of the image with new ones. It works similarly to the Colorize extension we already saw, only that sadly you don't have access to the color selection widgets, which is extra frustrating because replacing colors is much more useful than what Colorize does. This extension is also really useful to set an image to grayscale, since you don't have a raster grayscale extension for some reason. Just set the saturation input to 0. Implode will distort the image to make this effect like it's imploding towards the center. You cannot control the location, but you can control the intensity with the factor input. Level and level with channel both do the same, letting you change the color levels. The difference is that with level, you change all the channels at once, and with levels with channel, only the specific selected channels. This is one of those extensions that's really difficult to understand without a real-time visual widget like in a proper raster image processing software. Basically, black point and white point controls how light the lights are and how dark the darks are, depending on the input, and gamma correction adjusts the overall lightness. If you choose level with channel, then all of this is applied only to the selected channel in the dropdown. Why couldn't both extensions be a single one, where you could select between one of the channels or all of them at once? I don't know. Either way, it is really awkward to use this extension. If you need to adjust the levels, I would recommend you to go to a proper image processing software. Median sets a median filter, which is a nice looking kinda blurry style of filter that has a bit of a hand-painted look, especially at high radius. Negate will set the image to its negative, no options. Normalize changes the range of the contrast to make it more equal. Sometimes you get a nicer looking image, no options. Oil paint is a really nice extension that will make your images look like an oil painting. The effect is really nice and convincing, and it's super easy to use. Just a single input to control the intensity. Opacity changes the opacity. It does the exact same thing than lowering the opacity in the fill and stroke dialog, but internally they are both separated. If you lower the opacity with this extension, the only way to raise it back again is by using this extension. The two opacities do not interact with each other. In any case, I would recommend you, if you want to lower the opacity of an image, use the option in the fill and stroke. It's much easier and faster and does the exact same thing. Also, this only works on images that support opacity, like PNGs. Raise will add planes to the corners of the image to create this raised or lowered look. With the width and height, you control the thickness of the border. Don't forget the border eats away the pixels from the image, so you may not want to go too thick. Raise will change the illumination of the planes to make it look like it's raised or lowered. Reduce noise is similar to Despeckle or Enhance. It is meant to reduce the noise of an image, but now you can control the intensity with the order input. Try to keep the intensity low, or the extension will start to damage the borders of your image. Resample will resize the image to the selected size without changing its proportions. It is used mostly to make an image of an unnecessarily big resolution to a smaller one, so it runs better and consumes less memory. With the width and height input, you set the new resolution of the image. This is not a percentage, this is the actual new resolution in pixels the image is gonna have. It is possible to give it non-uniform values, but the extension will automatically correct them to maintain the proportions of the image. Also, if you export it using the extract extension we already saw in the previous section, you will get the new image with the new resolution. Shade does something similar to Emboss. It creates this type of curved surface effect. With azimuth you control the light direction, and elevation should control the elevation, but for me it only controls how light or dark it is. Colored shading will apply the color on top to make it really similar to the Emboss extension. Sharpen will sharpen the image. You control the intensity with the radius and sigma again. Keep the values relatively low, otherwise the image will start looking bad. Solarize will create this bizarre effect, almost like a negative, but only on selected colors. You control the intensity with factor. At 100%, it looks normal, but going down from there, it starts applying the effect more and more. Swirl is similar to the Implode extension we already saw, in that it distorts the image. This time it swirls from the center. Like Implode, you cannot control the location, but you can control the intensity with the degree input. Unsharp Mask. I'm not entirely sure what it does. At first I thought it had something to do with unsharpening, or maybe something to do with an Inkscape mask, but I tried everything and I just couldn't get it to work. Maybe somebody in the comments can tell us what it's supposed to do. Wave is one of those extensions that distort the image. This time it makes a wave pattern. With amplitude you control the strength of each wave, and with wavelength the space between each one. A smaller wavelength results in a bigger quantity of waves. One thing I found annoying is that you start to see a white background at the top and bottom borders, and there is no way to adjust that. The Render menu has extensions that will build out some sort of path using algorithms. In my opinion, some of the coolest and most useful extensions are on this menu. 3D Polyhedron from the submenu 3D creates a 3D polygonal shape using normal, everyday Inkscape paths. This is very important. While you can rotate it and scale it and change the illumination, it is not really a 3D shape at all. At no moment Inkscape is loading to memory or rendering a 3D object. What it's doing is using the data in this extension to generate a group of 2D paths that look like a correct 3D object. Once it's been created, you can go in and edit the path normally if you want. In the Model tab, you can select a built-in primitive from the Objects dropdown. You have a ton to choose from. Most of them have weird names and I don't even know what they are. You can even load your own custom .obj 3D file. OBJ is the standard 3D file format. Most 3D modeling applications can export OBJ files. You have to use the final item called load from file. In the file name input, you have to put the name of your OBJ file, which has to be placed in the Poly3D directory, in the Inkscape install folder. It would have been more comfortable to have access to a load or import menu, but that's what we got. Right now they are being drawn straight from the front, which is not very descriptive. It is possible to rotate them in the View tab. The rotation input boxes set the rotation in degrees. You'll have to first select the axis for each rotation. Not the most intuitive way to control the rotation, but it works. The next tab is the style. Scaling factor will scale it uniformly. These options will control the fill color, opacity, stroke opacity, and width that will be used to generate the shapes. Again, a bit awkward having to input the numbers for everything. It would have been amazing to have access to a color selection mode. The shading checkbox enables and disables the illumination. Light X, Y, and Z control the location of the light source. It appears to be a directional light, by the way. The Show drop-down controls how it's gonna be rendered, only edges, points, or everything. All in all, this is a really cool way to get a 3D model into Inkscape and have it be editable. But the truth is that controlling everything with these inputs is a complete pain, to the point I would rather import an image of a 3D model and then trace it over manually, if it's not too complex. Still, one of the coolest extensions in the program in my opinion. Wireframe Sphere, also from the 3D submenu, will make a wireframe sphere. This extension works similarly to the previous one, in the sense that it will create an editable path, with the options you set in here. Lines of latitude and lines of longitude sets how many lines the sphere is gonna have. Tilt and rotation controls the rotation in degrees. And radius will set the size. A very useful option is hide lines behind sphere, which will do that, making the sphere more readable. Great and easy to use extension if you need a globe or something like that. Classic is the first extension in the submenu Barcode QR Code, which contains barcode or QR code generators. This one will let you create classic barcodes, like the ones you see in different products. Barcode type sets the type of barcode. There are a lot of them, and I have no idea what they do, but if you want to use a barcode, you probably will. Barcode data sets the actual data the barcode will encode. The type of data changes depending on the type of barcode. If you put it wrong, Inkscape will tell you what you need in an error message. Bar height changes how tall the bar is gonna be. Data matrix will let you make a data matrix, which is this type of code that consists of black and white dots that can encode text. Text sets the text to be encoded. The size dropdown sets the size of the matrix, and the square size controls the size it's gonna have in pixels. QR code makes a QR code. In case you aren't familiar, it's basically another scannable code that uses a black and white matrix to store text. It's really popular to use with URLs, so people can scan them with their phones and lead them to a website. The text field sets the text. Invert QR code inverts it so it's surrounded by black instead of white. And square size to set the size. Then you have some options related to how it looks. The most important options are the smoothing of the dots. You set the value with the smooth square value. And you change the type of smoothing with the options in the Smooth tab. Then you can change the shape with the Shapes tab, making it so it's made out of circles instead of squares. Really useful extension, these three ones. Calendar will build an actual working calendar, and I find that surprisingly cool for some reason. With the Configuration tab, you set how it's gonna look. You can set the year, the amount of displayed months, whether to fill the days or not, show the week. You can even set the date the week will start, and what days are weekends. Really thorough options. With the Layout tab, you set the overall way it's gonna look. Automatically set the size and position will make the calendar fit in as best it can to the page size and dimensions, so you control how it's gonna look by adjusting the page. If this option is disabled, then you can adjust how many months per line there are with this option, and the size and margin with these two inputs. In the Colors tab, you set the colors for each of the elements. Just click on the buttons to open a color selection menu, though it's not hard to go in and change the colors manually after the calendar has been created, and it's probably more easy this way. Fonts changes the fonts. Just like with the colors, the user interface is a bit tricky to use. You have to actually write and know the name of the font you want. Just change the font with the text tool after the calendar has been created. It's way easier. And with the Localization tab, it's possible to set the day and month names, as well as the week names, and the character encoding in case you're not using standard text. Really cool and useful extension. Foldable Box will create the guides that you use to build a box that can be folded with tabs, like wrapping boxes. The shapes are always generated in the page area. Width, height, and depth are used to set the size of the box, and tab proportion, how long the tabs are gonna be. Function Plotter will graph a mathematical function on a selected rectangle. The rectangle will be used to define the location and scale of the graph. Here is the thing, I tried playing around with it, and I found that I still hate math, and I have not the willpower to push myself through. I honestly don't get what anything is doing here. I can guess more or less, but I honestly don't feel like you or me are gonna enjoy going through this. So I'm gonna leave to you the exploring of this extension. I will move on to the next one. Have fun doing math. Gear from the Gear submenu will create a gear, in a similar way to the gear path effect, but making a single one instead of multiple ones. Number of teeth sets how many teeth the gear is gonna have. Circular pitch sets the diameter of the circle. Pressure angle controls the shape of the teeth. The higher the number, the sharper they'll be. Diameter of the center hole does that, sets the diameter of the center hole. 0 eliminates the hole altogether. Rack gear will create this saw teeth shape. Rack length controls the length. Because the shape's teeth are always the same relative size, tooth spacing controls the overall size of the shape. And contact angle is how sharp the teeth are gonna be. At 0 it looks like a square, and at 45 looks like an actual saw shape. Cartesian grids from the grid submenu will create a Cartesian grid. In Inkscape it's just a grid with the possibility of adding subdivisions. You have a lot of options here. Border thickness controls the thickness of the stroke around the border. Then you have two tabs, one for the x-axis and another identical for the y-axis. This controls some options regarding the sizes and subdivisions. Major divisions defines how many divisions are gonna be per axis. Measure spacing, how wide or tall are gonna be each cell. It is possible to subdivide each cell into smaller ones with a thinner stroke using subdivisions per major division. It is also possible to even subdivide that with subdivisions. With major, minor, and subminor thickness, you control the thickness of the stroke of each type of division. Grid just makes a simple grid, this time without the possibility of subdividing. It is also always created aligning with the page at the center. Line width controls the stroke size of the entire grid. Horizontal and vertical spacing is how wide or tall are the squares. And horizontal and vertical offset, the offset from the center of the page. Isometric grid creates an isometric grid. X and Y divisions control how many divisions the grid will have. Division spacing is how big it's going to be. Just like with the Cartesian grid, you have the option to add subdivisions and subdivisions. And just like there, you have thickness control for each of them. Polar grid will create a polar grid, which is a round grid made of two parts, an inner circle and an outer one. A bit less useful than the other grids in my opinion, but a nicer option to have. Inside the center there is a dot for some reason, and with center dot diameter, you can make it bigger or smaller. Then you have options for the two types of divisions, the circular and the other ones. In the circular division tab, measure circular divisions controls the amount of circular divisions, and measure circular spacing, how spaced apart they are. Just like with the previous grids, you can also add subdivisions and change the thickness of both. Angular divisions has pretty much the same options with a couple of variances. Angle division controls how many divisions there are going to be in the outer circle. Angle divisions at center controls how many divisions are going to be in the inner circle. You can even have subdivisions, but only on the outer one. And of course you can control the thickness of both. L system creates something mathy, I think. It makes this tree. According to the help, it uses the text in the input axiom and rules to generate the tree using these Fs and pluses. Then there are these input boxes, which seem to control the overall shape of the tree, such as how many copies there are, and the angle it leans on. Like with many of these math extensions, I don't feel entirely comfortable talking about them, because I didn't expend enough time to learn the ins and outs, so excuse me if I skip this one too. It also looks really niche too. I got no idea who could use it. NiceCharts will create a visual chart with the data you give it. It is meant for data visualization. The Data tab is where the data is handled. Here you got two subtabs, Data from File and Direct Input. With Data from File, you can open your own CSV file. Though I haven't been able to find out where you should place the file, so it's found. It is not in the same directory than the SVG file, that's for sure. Anyway, skip it to the right tab next to it. Direct Input allows you to input your own data. The sample text that comes by default shows you the format. It is one word followed by a colon and a number. You separate every item with a comma. With the input setup, you can go to the chart type dropdown to set the type of chart you want. You have four options: bar chart, pie chart, pie chart percentage, which will assume the data was percentage based, and it will only show the field percentage, and a stacked bar. In the Labels tab, you can set up the font color and size. Just like with the calendar extensions, this uses a very weird and awkward interface to set these values. It's better to just wait until you apply it and go in and change those values manually, in my opinion. The charts label handles the way the charts look. Right away you can flip them with the Draw Horizontal checkbox. It is possible to control the length and width, radius and stroke width of each bar. You even have some color schemes you can pick from, though again, I would recommend you to do this manually after you apply the extension. Finally, the Values tab has a single option that allows you to show the number set. I find this to be one of the most interesting extensions, because just like with the calendar, it solves one problem you may have very well, plus it's really fun and easy to use. Parametric Curves works very similarly to the function plotter extension we just saw. I'm not entirely sure what's the difference between this and the other extension. They both seem to do about the same thing, plotting a function inside of a rectangle using some kind of math input. In any case, just like with the function plotter, I will skip this one. Again, this is a very niche extension, most people won't use it or care about it, and I don't feel like spending any more time than the absolute necessary doing math. Random tree will create this tree-like shape using straight lines that is completely random. Initial size says how big and complex the tree is gonna be. Minimum size, how small the branches are gonna be. The smaller they are, the higher the quantity they'll be. I'm not entirely sure what omit redundant segments does, but it does seem to make the tree more balanced and symmetrical. Spirograph simulates the result of a spirograph, which is a device to make these weird curve-based shapes. After playing with it for a while, I still have no idea what each of these inputs do exactly. Some of them are fairly intuitive, like the rotation and radius, but others, like the ring and gear radius, I can't find out exactly what they do. I recommend you to just mess around with the values until you get something you like. Triangle will generate a triangle. The resulting triangle will be based upon the input's side length, A, B, and C, which controls how long each side will be, and angle A, B, and C, which will be the angle of each corner. Very awkward to use because it's really difficult to visualize what is a correct triangle just by using text inputs, and very frequently you'll find yourself looking at this warning telling you that the specifications are invalid. And we are done with the extensions for now. We still have a long ways to go, but for now we are done with the two longest menus. Before ending, I want to remind you that I make Inkscape tutorials every week, so if you're interested in that sort of content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Also, any type of like and comment is hugely appreciated, and it helps the channel a lot. That was it for now. See you next week. Bye.